Hello and welcome back to the Out of Spec podcast. Copart currently has over 7,000 electric vehicles for sale for people to buy, bid on, purchase, and then repair and use or even put back on the market. Now, to help us learn more about all of the electric vehicles that are on Copart, the process of fixing them, what to look out for, I have Alex from our Out of Spec Renew channel. Alex, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Awesome. Glad to have you on. So there are a ton of EVs that are on Copart right here. Over 7,519 electric vehicles on Copart. And of course, there's more than Copart. There's IAAI. There's other auction sites where you can buy electric vehicles. And so looking through here, it creates some interesting options, right? We have Model 3, BMW i3, Nissan Leaf, Audi e-tron, more Leafs, Kia Soul EV, which pretty interesting car, RAV4 EV. There's a lot of interesting things here. Ford Focus, battery electric vehicle. I imagine for someone like you who works on a lot of these older EVs, this is like maybe heaven.
Yeah, there's tons and tons of stuff on Copart, and you kind of get the whole spectrum. I mean, most people know Copart for being kind of an auction site for wrecked cars, usually insurance write-offs. So a lot of the time they're actually being sold by insurance companies. But there's a lot of stuff that's being sold by private sellers and dealers as well. And they're not necessarily always crashed cars. Sometimes there's cars that there's really nothing wrong with. They might just have normal wear and tear. Sometimes you have cars that have mechanical damage that can be for sale, and kind of everything in between.
Interesting. Kind of like here. This one's a normal wear, and it seems that, let's see, this is an enhanced vehicle. So I guess that's meaning that it was cleaned, but no idea if it runs and drives. Of course it is on. So this RAV4 EV, 100.
It's actually, yeah. So I'm noticing there in the vehicle details on the side, if it did run and drive, normally it would say on the highlights, it would say run and drive. And I can see in that picture they don't actually have the car in ready. So I'm going to guess that it doesn't run and drive, but they don't have it advertised as mechanical damage, which is kind of a weird thing. Yeah, that's actually relatively high mileage for RAV4.
Yeah.
I've worked on so many RAV4s that I kind of know all the normal failure modes for them. There's probably one of two things that are wrong with that: either battery contactors or flooded drive unit would be the two most likely options there.
And by flooded drive unit, like physically flooded with water?
Flooded with coolant.
Coolant.
So
Okay.
an internal coolant leak. It's a really common problem for the Tesla large drive unit, which of course the Toyota RAV4 uses. It was a car that was built under partnership between Toyota and Tesla. And it uses a large drive unit almost just like a Model S would use.
Interesting. Yeah, all these warning lights here on this RAV4. I also see turtle mode. I'm sure you see here as well.
Yeah, that's because the car is basically just in accessory mode. So just like a car where you put it on into accessory mode, all of the lights light up. It's because the car's not actually on. Yeah.
I haven't driven a gas car in quite some time, so I totally forget. Like, yeah, accessory mode, all of the lights turn on. Yeah, that's.
Yep. Yeah.
It's one of the obvious things. But I'll kind of go to your side, actually share your screen, kind of looking at some of the vehicles that are there. Is there anything that immediately points out to you? I know previously we're actually talking about this 2018 Model 3 that actually has a buy now price. So on some of these auction sites, you're able to just buy it now. Of course, they have auctions. And so instead of having to wait to the auction, you can just buy it now for a certain price. Now, this vehicle actually says it runs and drives. And exterior wise, it looks fine. Like there's no particular damage.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like it's in pretty decent shape. I mean, it says that it's just normal wear and tear, which I would say, looking at the pictures, probably true. I mean, it's got a little bit of dirt here and there. Doesn't look like there's any. I don't see any alerts present on the screen, although it's a little hard to tell with the glare. Yeah, I mean, overall, it just looks like a pretty decent condition Model 3. Is this a? Did it say which model it was on the screen there? Oh, it's a long range dual motor. So this is actually a long range dual motor car. That's actually
Wow.
seems like a really good deal.
Yeah. What would you look out for buying something like this, right? Imagine I'm in Florida, this is in Michigan, so it's quite the ways away. If I were to buy this sight unseen, just looking from some of these pictures, I guess what are some identifiers that there could be other problems?
Yeah, so I mean, it looks like this is probably a private seller, right? Because the pictures are not taken at a Copart lot. So this is
Right?
going to be a private seller or a dealer that's selling this. Um, and I mean, it's possible that they could be there could be some hidden issues. That's part of the issue with you kind of take a risk with buying these cars from auctions like Copart because everything's sold as is, and you kind of get what you get. So you kind of have to be a little bit careful about things. You probably want to assume that you might have to do some maybe minor repairs to the car at least. But you never know. There could be something, more of an issue hiding underneath. But on a car like the Model 3, they're generally pretty solid cars. Most of the issues with them are pretty well understood. And this one is fairly low mileage, has a clean title, so it should still be under the original powertrain warranty. Um, yeah, that's seems like a pretty interesting one. Usually you don't see a lot of off-site vehicles like this, actually.
Curious. Maybe I shouldn't have showed this one. I should have kept this to myself. I might bid on this. It seems like a decent deal.
Yeah, and looks like the auction on it actually ends in about 14 hours is when the auction starts.
Amazing. And I should clarify, so it's a certificate of title of Michigan, but this car is actually in Massachusetts, North Boston.
Yeah, so that's probably another sign that it's likely a dealer. They probably bought this car from an auction or maybe got it as a
Hmm.
trade-in, and they just have the title from wherever the previous owner was. But yeah, it does appear to be a clean title, and yeah,
Interesting. Wow. So I guess going further out of here, back onto the main screen of all of the many EVs, and you can see just in that time, right in the beginning, there was what did I say, 7,519, and now it's 23. So a few have been added since we've been
yep, a
filming
few have
this.
been added in that time.
So it's always being updated. I think another vehicle that I think has been interesting has been the Rivian EDVs. So it
Yeah,
looked
there's actually been I actually searched for them on here not too long ago. Oops, we want to go Rivian. There you go. There's an
yeah,
EDV right here. So I've seen a number of these on here, but I haven't actually seen any that have been assigned an auction date.
right.
So I don't know if any of them ever actually end up going through the auction. If they're an insurance write-off, it might be some kind of weird thing where, you know, maybe somebody else buys it back. I don't know that I've actually seen one go through an auction, but this one doesn't look like it's too badly damaged. I mean, it's got some missing panels over here on the passenger side, but it doesn't have any like major damage to it. It looks like actually it's in maybe pretty decent condition, although it does not appear to run and drive. Oh, they don't have keys for it, so that might be why they can't advertise it as a run and drive if they don't have keys. When I see a
Okay,
flat tire here too.
it's good to know. Could also be
Yeah,
the
interesting.
case. I know Rivian says they will not be working on EDVs. So if you buy one from auction and then end up wanting to like have it repaired or have it serviced by Rivian in any capacity, they refuse it.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, I actually just recently got access to Rivian's parts catalog. They have a parts catalog for third-party shops, and they do have a service subscription as well that gives you access to all the service manuals and the diagnostic software. Although the service subscription is pretty expensive, so until more of them are off warranty and people are needing repairs on them, it probably doesn't make a whole lot of economic sense for me to get a service subscription on them. But I do have access to the parts manual and everything, and there's pretty much everything that's not part of the high voltage system or the powertrain is generally available as a basically just an over the counter part that it's available through through their parts catalog.
And even I'm looking at here at this side. So there's some older EVs. So here I see a 2002 Toyota RAV4. I'll kind of show you my screen. So something
Let's
like
see. Oh yeah,
this.
yeah. That one's been on there for a while. Actually, what does it say? Oh, okay. So this one was supposed to go through auction, I think, the other day, but
Oh.
maybe it must not have sold because now does it say that it's an upcoming lot or something?
Yeah, it says upcoming lot, and this is in San Martin,
Okay.
California. San Jose.
Yeah, it must not have sold because I remember seeing this one on here, and it I think the auction for it might have been yesterday or the day before, or maybe it was today even. But it must not have found a buyer. They may have had a reserve price set on it, and if it
Mhm.
didn't meet the reserve, then they'll run it again. That's the other thing on a lot of these is a lot of the time they have a reserve price on the auction. So if it doesn't meet the reserve price, um, depending on the way they have it set up, sometimes it's on the seller's approval. So the seller can say, "Oh, I like this, final bid. I'll accept it, even though it's lower than my reserve." Or sometimes it just automatically gets run again if it doesn't meet the reserve.
Okay. And is that just infinite until it finally meets that reserve price?
Um, to an extent, if the vehicle has to run through auction more than once, Copart actually charges the seller an additional fee to run the vehicle again. So if you're running the vehicle multiple times and not meeting your reserve, you're basically paying every time that it doesn't sell to run it again. So yeah, it's interesting. Oh, it's a
Oh,
donated vehicle.
yeah.
Huh.
The net proceeds from the sale of this vehicle will benefit a charity. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of cars on here are donated vehicles as well. Like a lot of the stuff that's like listed as a not run and drive and has mechanical damage or whatever. A lot of the time they're donated vehicles.
Wow. This thing, do you know much about this generation of RAV4? I mean, 75,000 miles. That's a
I
lot
don't
for
know a
this.
ton about them. I have worked on one once before that had a bad. Can't remember what Toyota's acronym was for it. It's basically the BMS, but they had some other fancy name for it. I think they called it the battery sensor computer or something. Um, but yeah, I replaced one on one of those once. That, but I haven't really done a whole lot with them. I know that there's been some folks that have done lithium battery swaps on them. There actually has been a couple. There's been one company that did have a lithium battery swap. I think they went out of business, and the rights to it got bought by another company. And I know there's actually a guy a couple hours south of me that his specialty is kind of actually the Ford Ranger EV, but he's actually
Okay.
done several of the Toyota RAV4 EVs as well. Um, he actually has a blog where he posts some of the battery upgrades and stuff that he's done, and I think his wife drives a first gen RAV4 EV that has over 200,000 miles on it.
Wow. I I mean, who says these EVs can't go so far? Even
Yep.
for then.
Yeah, and the NIMH chemistry that they used on those cars originally is actually fairly robust. I mean, it definitely has its problems. It's not very energy dense. And NIMH has, they basically call it like a memory. So if you don't fully charge and discharge the cells regularly, they basically limit the amount of usable capacity. So say if you charge the car to full and then you only discharge it to 50% all the time,
Mhm.
eventually it'll get to a point where you can only use that 50% of the battery. And they can be
Oh.
reconditioned through like a discharging and recharging process
Mhm.
through some method. I'm no expert on NIMH, but I know that there's reconditioning that can be done on them in some cases. But yeah, they're pretty interesting setup. I think that the only other, so that both the RAV4 EV and some of the Ford Ranger EVs used NIMH batteries from that time period in the late 90s and early 2000s. And probably some of the other cars from that time period too. But those are the ones that I know of. Well, and I guess the GM EV1, that's kind of the famous car that everybody knows. Because a
Right.
lot of those used NIMH as well.
Do you know what I guess, the reason for these changes have been? Of course, through times, innovation, you find more, you just find better characteristics in certain battery chemistries than others. But going from that to what we talked about, lithium manganese batteries that we see in the I and the EV, to then lithium iron phosphate, to nickel manganese cobalt. It's just interesting seeing all of the changes through battery chemistry throughout time.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically just incremental improvements, and science, scientific discoveries and stuff, and breakthroughs in battery technology. There was a car during this time frame that did have a lithium-ion battery, and that was the
Oh,
Nissan um, Ultra EV.
okay.
And that was actually the first production car to use a lithium-ion battery. Was the Nissan Ultra EV, based on a the gas Japanese car. I think was called an Arnesa,
Mhm.
but the Ultra EV they sold in the U.S. under very well. They didn't sell them. They were lease only, just like most of the other EVs from this time period. Um, but yeah, it had a lithium-ion battery pack, and some very limited number of them were leased to the public. And then, of course, like most of the other cars from that time period, they were crushed, probably in
Right.
2003, 2004 era, just like the EV1 and all those cars. I wonder if there's any of those cars left. I don't know that I've ever seen anything about any of these um, that still exist. I'd be kind of cool if there's still some out there.
Yeah, I did not know Nissan had this. It's so sad seeing all of the history that these automakers have built these interesting EVs like the GM, the EV1, like the Ford Ranger EV, like the Ultra, that they end up destroying at the end.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it all stems from in the mid '90s, California implemented a zero emission vehicle mandate. So they mandated that I think it was the top seven automakers had to offer some sort of electric vehicle option if they wanted to be able to sell cars in California. And it was supposed to be stepped targets over time of increasing amounts of the percentage of vehicle sales.
Mhm.
So that's why all those vehicles existed. But GM was kind of the um, what would be the right word for that? I guess they were kind of the one that kickstarted it because they developed. It was originally called the Impact. Was the EV1 concept, and I think they showed it off at some auto show, and basically said, oh, we could make this into an actual production, scaled production vehicle. And yeah, state of California basically said, well, why don't you do it then? So yeah, that was how the first zero emission vehicle mandate started, and then it was struck down in 2003. And that's when most of the cars were recalled and crushed. So almost all the GM EV1s, there's only maybe a couple dozen of those left in some museums and at some universities and stuff. I think there were originally maybe about 2,000 EV1s
Mhm.
that were produced somewhere in that neighborhood. And it was kind of the same deal for the RAV4 EV, the Ford Ranger EV. Nissan had that Ultra EV. Honda had the EV Plus. Chrysler had the Epic minivan, so it was basically just a Chrysler Voyager that was fully electric. Yeah, all kind of interesting stuff.
Wow. Yeah, I'm looking this up now. So I see the Chrysler Epic. This is nuts.
Yep,
Same thing.
all these cars that a lot of people never even knew existed.
Wow. Yeah, a lot of history with EVs. It's so much time has passed. We're 20, 30 years in the future now. And finally, automakers are putting their full effort into EV technology. But to think during this time period that they had some sort of IP and understanding of how EVs work.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
But yeah, now looking back over here onto Copart, I'll share your screen again.
All
As you
right.
scroll, I kind of went through the older EVs, filtered it by year, and it slowly
Yeah.
goes from like the Model S and Leaf and thousands of Model S's and Leafs. These batteries, these motors, what ends up really happening to them are just eventually crushed.
I mean, there's a bunch of different things that can happen. A lot of the time, the cars will get purchased sometimes by private buyers that want to fix the cars up or use them for parts or whatever. Sometimes they're bought by like salvage car rebuilders. So, like, usually it's going to be a dealership that specializes in buying salvage wrecked cars and then fixing them up and reselling them. Actually, my next door neighbors here at my shop basically do that. They actually do a lot of commercial vehicles like Mercedes Sprinter vans and stuff, and they rebuild them and then resell them. And then a lot of them end up going to you know salvage yards where they sell all the parts off of them that they can, and then they get crushed and recycled. So there's kind of a bunch of different things that can happen to them. But yeah, it really just depends. Um,
Interesting.
yeah. A lot of the time, what I end up looking at on here, I'm not really so interested in the cars that are wrecked. I don't do body work or anything, but I'm interested in the vehicles that have mechanical issues. So a lot of the time when I'm looking for stuff on here, I'll actually filter by condition. So if I go condition, and then I can find mechanical, and so these are going to be all the vehicles that are on here for mechanical issues. And you can even filter for, clean title. So clean title, mechanical damage, that's what all these vehicles are. Like here we've got a BMW i3, not too far away, has a buy it now price of $2,500.
Wow.
Um, so who knows what's wrong with that one, but apparently it does not run and it has mechanical damage. So could be very expensive to fix, could be something relatively simple. Who knows?
Interesting. I mean, it's a BMW EV. I've watched a couple i8 repair videos, and just the hybrid system alone can be kind of complicated. So I wonder how complex the i3 ends up being.
Yeah, there's a few different kind of known problem areas for the i3. I think they're kind of known for AC compressors grenading, and sometimes a an AC compressor that's failed like that can cause a high voltage isolation fault if it gets metal particulate into the actual. I mean, the AC compressor has its own motor in it. So sometimes if metal particulate gets into the motor portion of the AC compressor, it can cause isolation faults. That could disable the car. I've also seen a few instances of i3s where the actual splines, where the motor interfaces with the gear reduction unit,
Hmm.
where the splines can strip out. I've heard of that happening before, and could be any number of things. You just never really know.
Wow. Yeah, these EVs end up being. The more I'm in this space, I realize a lot of aspects they can be just as complicated as internal combustion engine vehicles. Now, of course, there's a million more moving parts, but the engineering and science behind it, there's a lot.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Now, over here, I actually see quite a few. I'll share my screen. So I saw
Oh
quite
yeah,
a few of, well, actually, here. So here's another iMiev for $1,500 buy it now price, currently auctioned $350, and it actually expires in just 43 minutes.
yeah, yeah. So I guess the auction on that one will start in 43 minutes. So that one is a mechanical damage, but apparently it does run and drive. So
Interesting.
that's interesting. I wonder if it's. I mean, most likely, if I were to guess, it's probably a battery issue, whether
Hmm.
it's a bad cell or a bad CMU. Those would probably be the most likely issues to see with it. Um, but there's probably a few other things that it could be as well. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of the older history of EVs. I'm like interested, but let's kind of move on to some of the expensive stuff here. So as you said, mainly focus on vehicles that are mechanically broken, but physically, body wise, they're fine.
Yeah, usually that's the kind of stuff that I would focus on. And I'm not really in the market of buying and selling cars, but it's always fun to look. But like if we want to filter by year and go the opposite way and look at the newer stuff. Um, we can kind of see some of these things. A lot of them don't even have auction dates assigned yet. But like here's a BMW iX with mechanical damage and front end damage. Yeah, so it's got front end damage and looks like tires off the bead, and it does not run and drive. So I wonder, doesn't look like any airbags deployed, at least not that I could see. Yeah, no airbags. Yeah, I wonder what's up with that one. Apparently it's Geico that's selling it, so it is an insurance auction. Sometimes that's another thing that you can watch for on some of these is usually if it's an insurance company selling a car, it's usually not going to be something that somebody else has monkeyed with.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the time, the real thing to be careful about on a lot of these auctions, if it's a private seller, is there's been a number of cases where people take parts off of cars or swap out good parts with bad parts, and then they'll send them back to auction. And a lot of people end up kind of, getting screwed buying cars through that methodology. There's actually a shop that I won't name names, but there's a shop not too far away from me that has quite a reputation for doing that kind of thing.
Wow. Yeah, it seems like a very risky business.
Yeah, so that's always something to be careful of, with any of this kind of stuff. Here we've got a Fisker Ocean with mechanical damage. Doesn't say if it's a clean or salvage title, but it doesn't look like it's wrecked or anything. Oh, it does run and drive apparently too, so I wonder what's actually wrong with it. Fascinating.
Now, I know a lot of these Fisker Oceans ended up having some sort of charge port failure, where the charge port itself wasn't broken, but
there's a charge port issue that seems to be pretty common on them. There's a few like recall issues, and I know that there's a big software update that's actually part of a recall, I think. And a lot of the cars struggle big time with doing the software update. I've heard of instances where sometimes it'll take 2 or 3 days to manually go through all the modules and update the software on everything.
Jeez.
It looks like this one runs, so it's probably not a software issue, but who knows? But yeah, there's all kinds of interesting stuff on here. You never know what you'll find. Sometimes you get some kind of oddball weird stuff too. Like if we go, sometimes if you look through the makes, like here's a BYD.
Really? Whoa.
A BYD E6.
So it's in Sun Valley, California, so I imagine it was likely sold in Mexico and then somehow ended up in a Copart auction in the United States.
Yeah, it could be. I know that there's a company in, I think, Chicago that used to did some kind of pilot program with BYD, and they ended up like selling or leasing a whole bunch of these cars to rideshare drivers. Could be something that came from there too, but your Mexico theory is probably more on point given the location. I wonder if that's where it's from. Because it doesn't say anything about having a title, so that might be accurate. Interesting. It's pretty rough. I don't think there's any way this is ever getting back on the road again.
Yeah, sourcing parts alone, body panels is going to be a nightmare on top of having to figure out how to fix it mechanically.
Let's see, what other oddball stuff can we find? Got some Fiskers.
Quite a bit of Fiskers.
Jaguar.
The I-Pace probably.
Yep, I-Pace. What do we have categorized as other? Oh, we've got some motorcycles, Energica. That's cool. Do we have any other fun ones that are odd?
What's T? What's that TF? Probably some sort of...
Oh, I think that's some of these lighting trailers. Yeah, sometimes you'll see like some box trucks occasionally from companies like Smith Newton and stuff occasionally. Oh, look, there's one single Mazda MX-30 for sale.
That's probably how many were sold in the United States. So,
Yeah, that's probably like a pretty significant portion of the entire fleet that were even sold.
wow, all the way in Texas. I mean, sorry, Kansas, Wichita, Kansas. Now, I also saw over here, I'll share my screen. I saw this. So, Kia Soul EV, which we touched on briefly in the beginning. This one runs and drives, and this has off lot, it seems, as well. $10,000 Canadian to buy. What would someone, I guess, look out for on a Kia Soul EV? Do you have much experience with those?
I don't have a ton of experience with the Soul, but I do know that there is. I think there was a recall where there was a software update implemented and stuff on them. They're kind of prone to having some issues with the battery pack, and I think a bunch of them actually had the batteries replaced under warranty. But and then there was like some kind of software fix that was implemented so that the battery management system can better identify if there's going to be a cell issue. Um, but yeah, I think that those issues are not. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's common, but they're certainly known problems for the Kia Soul. And yeah, it seems like that's kind of a known thing on them.
Interesting.
But I think that overall they're generally pretty solid cars based on what I've seen. But I don't really have a lot of experience with them. They might have issues if it's anything. If the motor uses a similar setup to the Ionic, like the original Ionic, not the newer, Ionic 5 and stuff, but the original Ionic sedan,
Right.
it might be a similar motor to that, which is also pretty similarly shared architecture with the Niro and the Kona. Those are pretty prone to issues with motor and gearbox bearing noise. I don't know if the Soul suffers from those problems, though. I don't know that I've heard about the Soul having those issues, so I'm not totally certain on that.
Interesting.
But I actually have an Ionic in my shop right now that has that
Okay.
issue.
And what year is that Ionic?
It's a 2017, yeah. So that's actually the first year for the Ionic.
Yeah, people tend to forget that the original, the OG Ionic vehicle, and now of course we have the Ionic 5, and the 9, and we'll be getting a ton of other like Ionic vehicles. But the original Ionic, wasn't it also a plug-in hybrid, or was it strictly just battery electric?
So I think in 2017 when they launched it, they had just a regular hybrid, and then they had the electric version. And then I think in 2018 or 2019 they introduced a plug-in hybrid variant. So there were three variants in total. There was the electric, the plug-in hybrid, and the fully electric. Um, the fully electric version underwent a pretty significant update, I think in 2021, maybe? I don't remember off the top of my head. But it got a bigger battery. It got an upgraded battery on the newer one that's totally different from the old one. So the original one uh, basically doesn't have any battery cooling, or maybe it's air cooled, but I'm pretty sure it's just passively cooled.
Mm-hmm.
And then the newer one actually got like a battery pack with liquid thermal management, um, which is something that I didn't realize. I had someone ask me about potentially doing a battery upgrade on an Ionic, and I did a little bit of research on it. Yeah, they're totally separate batteries. They're not in any way related to each other between the two versions.
Interesting. Do you know why that would particularly be, instead of keeping production pretty?
I assume that what they probably did is they likely updated the Ionic to use basically the same like battery architecture as the Niro and the Kona. I think that was probably the main reason. It was just updated so that it probably shared architecture. I'm not totally sure on that though. But the early ones, like this one, have the smaller 28 kilowatt hour battery. Yeah, it just basically doesn't have any cooling on it.
I heard that you can tell if a Tesla has had its battery removed, particularly on the Model S and X, if its suspension is on the highest ride height. What's the story about that?
Well, so it kind of depends, right? Because if the air suspension can be raised so it's at its very high ride height. So if it's just sitting there in high ride height, it'll look like it's sitting really high. But the other thing that could happen is if the battery pack has been removed, then the car will sit higher because it's got, if you're talking about like the larger size batteries, like an 85 or a 90 kilowatt hour, that's about 1,400 pounds that you're removing from the car. So the car's going to sit a lot higher when you remove all that weight out of it. I actually heard about a situation a while back where it was actually a shop that did electric conversions. They bought a Model S just to use for parts. And the main thing they cared about it was all the battery modules. And when they pulled the battery out of it, someone had left just enough electronics in there so that the car would know that there was a battery management system and stuff. But they had filled the battery case with concrete so that it weighed enough that the car didn't look fishy. And, it's an as-is sale, so
Right.
they basically just got screwed out of a battery on that one.
It's actually crazy. I mean, I imagine the battery market, especially for some of these older Teslas, I'm thinking like pre-2017, very expensive, out of warranty. And so the values become pretty valuable on secondhand market.
The battery market for Model S's is kind of interesting. It actually used to be crazy. They used to be crazy expensive, especially the individual modules, because they were super, super popular with people doing electric conversions. Because they're a pretty nice, usable size, and they have really high energy density, at least comparatively to most other stuff that was available. And it used to be that the battery modules for Model S's would sell for $1,000, $1,500 even per module, which is, what would that be like? I guess that'd be like $300 per kilowatt hour, give or take, at the high end. Nowadays, they're way, way lower. Usually on the open market, individual battery modules from a Model S, like just for an 85 kilowatt hour version, so that's the 5.3 kilowatt hour module. Usually they sell for somewhere in like the $300 to $500 range. But yeah, there's definitely a market for it because there's, as the cars get older, there's more and more issues that have to be fixed on them. Depending on who you ask, there's some people that do module swapping and stuff on Model S's. I'm not a fan of doing module swapping on Model S because the battery management system is very complex. And it's extremely difficult to properly match a module to the rest of the pack. Usually it doesn't hold up very well long term. I would say in most cases, you'd be lucky to get 2 years out of a module swap on a Model S pack.
Well, why is that? Are the modules so entirely different that they wouldn't match?
Well, there's a few different factors there. So the battery management system that Tesla uses is pretty complex in the number of different data points that it monitors.
Okay.
So it's monitoring the battery management system actually calculates the capacity for every single individual brick within the battery. So a brick is a group of cells that are all in parallel with each other, and then those are series, right? So in a total pack for a Model S, say it's a large size 85 kilowatt hour pack, it has 16 battery modules, and each of those modules has 6 bricks that are in series.
Okay.
So the BMS is constantly keeping track of the amount of capacity that each of the bricks has. And it's also, of course, monitoring the voltage of the bricks. It monitors the internal resistance, all those different things. And if anything gets too far out of whack, it can really cause problems. And the other part of the issue with it is that the battery management system doesn't have a lot of balancing capability. So if there is too big of an imbalance, the BMS can't keep up with keeping it in balance. So you'll end up with if you have, say you put in a module to replace one that had, some failed cells in it or something. Mm-hmm. So you replace one module in the pack, and let's say it has maybe a difference in capacity of 5%. Over time, say it has 5% more capacity than the other modules. Over time, as you charge and discharge the pack, it's going to start to drift apart from the rest. And eventually the imbalance will get so big that the car will start to trigger alerts for an SOC imbalance. And usually on an SOC imbalance, I think the threshold is 20%. So if it gets to a 20% threshold difference between different bricks, it'll throw a BMS U018 code. And that's a pretty common failure mode. Tends to happen a lot on remanufactured packs. So Tesla actually used to do remanufactured packs where they would swap out modules, and they don't do it anymore. And there's a reason. It's because they don't tend to hold up very well long term. So remanufactured packs are kind of a thing to be careful of on especially on Model S's.
That's interesting. Yeah, Tesla's in their battery management system. They've they've had issues for so long. I know people kind of make jokes about Tesla's battery management system today, and how it could be a little wonky, but
yeah, and I would say that, I mean, most anything that's going to be a really modern EV is going to have a pretty similar amount of complexity in terms of the amount of parameters that they're tracking, and that just, it makes it harder to be able to do certain types of repairs depending on, if it's an actual cell level issue, it makes things more difficult.
Interesting. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Alex, on this out of spec Copart adventure. When Kyle said, hey, you and Alex should look at some Copart vehicles, electric Copart vehicles, I was super excited because this is something I do in my free time. You said there's something you do in your free time as well. So it's just awesome to be able to make a fun video about it. But of course, if you want to learn more about electric vehicles in depth, how they're repaired, particularly a lot of older EVs, you can see Alex on our Out of Spec Renew channel, where he has a ton of cool content, right? Like you fixing the Mitsubishi i-MiEVs. You just worked on RAV4, a new gen Leaf, as well as the old gen Leaf. And there's a lot of cool content over there. So, of course, check out the Out of Spec Renew channel. But thank you so much for joining me again, Alex. I've learned a lot about EVs on auctions.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, look, this is the Out of Spec podcast. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Isaiah, and I will see you guys in the next one.